Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Ratner. Today I am joined by Penny George and Dan Hensley, the co-creators of the mindbodymedicineinfo.org website. On this website, they keep all of the recovery stories that they're collecting, and what they're working towards is sharing them with doctors to get the doctors won over to this point of view. And we know how important that all is going to be. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and I'll get back to you personally. Penny and Dan, I want to welcome you to the show. It's a pleasure to have you guys joining us. I've actually got a big UK contingent. It started with Georgie Oldfield, and it has expanded from there. But it's great to have you on, and I should acknowledge, Dan, this will crack you up, but we have so many Dans on this show, and of course I am as well.
I saw that. I saw that
So
on YouTube.
it's like an inside joke with the audience. I have to acknowledge it. But you're special in your own right. And Penny, you're our first Penny.
Yay, but I am completely drowning in Dan's at the moment, so I know the feeling.
Right, exactly. So, okay, we're going to talk about how you came to create this website and the mission that you have. And of course, the mission is to get people to share their recovery journeys and their recovery stories with the doctors that they work with so that we can start spreading the word and having more doctors become educated in this. But I want to start at the beginning, which is your own mind-body TMS stories. And I'll take it one at a time, and then we'll talk about how you came together. So Penny, let's start with you.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what your process was in discovering the mind-body process.
Sure. So I developed chronic fatigue syndrome in 2017. Obviously didn't know that's what it was for a while. Was diagnosed in 2018. And I was one of the lucky ones. And within about 2 years of becoming ill, I discovered Dr. Sarno. I was told about him by a Buddhist nun, of all things. And bought The Divided Mind, his last book. And even luckier, I ended up being what Dr. Sarno calls a book recovery, and recovered from reading about half of the book one evening. And the next day, I was fine. I was better, and I've never been ill again since, which is absolutely remarkable. But I came to learn through Georgie Oldfield that you mentioned in your introduction that actually that was potentially a bit of a risk, because she has seen, in her experience in this work, she's seen a lot of people who had book recoveries end up relapsing because they haven't actually done the emotional work of processing the emotions and the stresses and the traumas and things that they've experienced. So I kind of took her advice to heart and have been doing that emotional work since my recovery to try and prevent myself ever becoming ill again. And in the process of doing that, I've managed to also cure myself of roughly 15 years of pretty bad arm and shoulder pain that I used to have. I've also kind of conquered my anxiety, and most recently I've managed to crack over 20 years of insomnia. So it's
Wow.
I'm just kind of knocking dominoes down every month at the moment.
This is great. So, I mean, I do want to say, I want to highlight that it's really nice that people can hear that you had a book cure, but then realized that there was more work to be done.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important message, because I know that some people get frustrated when they hear about book recoveries because they think, well, why isn't that happening for me? You know, why do I have to do all this work? But I think no matter at which point you actually get better, you still have to do the work, I think, is the message.
Absolutely. So thank you for highlighting that. Dan, let's turn to you now. And I wanna hear about your story. How did this all happen for you?
So I'm at the opposite end of the scale to Penny, and I was for about 15 years of quite severe back pain, sciatica. Same story, really, similar to a lot of others, where got the surgeon holding up the MRI scans for me, showing me bulging discs. And early 20s went away believing that my life was destined to be in pain. Spent lots of time going through osteopaths and physiotherapists and doing the stretches, getting my knees bent. and all that sort of stuff, and ultimately being told you've just got to live with it. Spent 15 years in that state where I was sort of managing it as best as I could, and then came across Dr. Sarno. Originally read his book, understood it conceptually, and then decided that definitely wasn't me. Mine was structural, so I spent another good couple of years letting that ruminate around my brain before starting to spot the patterns. So I'm in the technology industry, and there's always a lot of change, and I just started to notice that whenever there was change, new management, or having to prove myself again, or a feeling at the time that the episodes would align, and then I started seeing the correlations coming through, and I went back to the work, and finally, after all that time, managed to become pretty much pain-free, to the point where I couldn't run without setting off a severe episode. I sort of recovered to a point where I could do most things, but I couldn't run, and I went back from running from 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 6 minutes, up to doing a half Ironman, which so that was sort of pretty much a proof point to myself that I was repaired and there was nothing structurally wrong with me. So mine was a bit longer than Penny's quick book recovery.
This is great, though, to actually be able to highlight two totally different kind of recovery stories. And Dan, I'm sorry that it took so long for you, but I appreciate that you're highlighting that. You highlighted something that's very important, or at least I heard it in what you said, which is having the information rattling around in your brain is important, even if you're not taking it in yet.
Yeah, I agree.
That was one of the things that got it done for you. And sometimes it's going to take time. I also wanted to say it's really interesting that it's only in the mind-body world that you would say you were one of the lucky ones to have suffered for 2 years.
I know it's all relative, isn't it?
But you're right. I mean, we look at Dan and we know. Either way, I kind of consider anybody who got to pain-free or reduced their symptoms dramatically and got their lives back, we're in luck because Sarno did that work. We're in luck because other mind-body practitioners are doing that work. So now that brings me to the work that you guys want to do and are doing to make a difference in this mind-body world. So let's talk about how you found each other first, and then we'll talk about the work.
Georgie Oldfield, again, was the person that kind of ended up bringing us together indirectly. So last summer during lockdown, she started a series of Facebook Live recovery interviews with various people who had recovered from, using Sarno's methods. And Dan did an interview first, and I watched his interview. And then a few weeks later, I did one, and Dan watched mine. And he kind of picked up on some of the things I was saying and some of the frustrations I was expressing about the medical profession not being open to this theory, and the vast majority of doctors refusing to take it on board.
Right.
And contacted me and said, did I fancy trying to work together to change that effectively? And I said yes, and here we are. That's how it started.
It's very exciting. So Dan, you had the idea before you contacted Penny. You had the idea we got to change how doctors are thinking about this. Is that right?
Yeah. So I sort of did a little bit of mind-body coaching and found it highly frustrating. And all credit to you for sticking with us, difficult patients. But I didn't have the patience. But I still wanted to do something to help, get the message out there. And that's just where the idea came from. The power of people telling their recovery stories was very helpful to me. So I wanted to, one, tell my recovery story, which is why I ended up on Georgie's, doing a recovery story for Georgie. But then two, it was, how do we, if we could change, the sort of concept that we had was if we can change one GP, one doctor, or get them to start considering this, then the knock-on effect would be multiplied. So there's only two of us, but if we can convert one GP, then we're having a positive impact. That's the thought process. And the first thing we thought was, well, there's clearly from Dr. Sarno, who was sort of one of the founders of this movement, but he's obviously expanded massively with the likes of yourself and Howard Schubiner and the PPDA and so it's sprawled out. So we thought, well, let's collate it in one place it's a relatively simple task for two people to do. We'll collect it in one place and start to share it with GPs. So the main sort of concept from our perspective was, can we encourage people who have recovered from a mind-body approach to go back to the people that they dealt with and tell them that they're now better, and nothing more than point them to the evidence, point them to the material, but tell their story back to their GP. Because since doing this work, we have spoken to a lot of GPs. They get like 10 in the UK, they get a 10-minute appointment. And how can you start asking people about their life and the stress and emotions in the 10 minutes? It's very difficult. They need to be able to direct patients somewhere. So we've started working with a number of GPs since then to answer some of those questions. Where can we direct people to, for example? But yeah, the main thing is that we try and get across is once you've recovered, do your bit and get back and tell the people who doubted and show them that there is another way.
It's so important, and I've talked to so many people who have recovered or in the process of recovering or struggling to recover, and it is pretty uniformly true that we all want to give back. It's one of the reasons that I'm doing this podcast. We not only want to give back, but we also, we experienced what it was like not knowing these things. If we had known them sooner.
Yeah.
I mean, even though it took some years after you discovered it, Dan, if you had been told that 1 year in, you might have only had 4 years of that. And Penny, you were lucky to only have 2 years. Well, if we got it to you sooner, you might have had 2 months. And
exactly.
So these are very important things. I'm hearing, though, that you guys really are doing two things at the same time very elegantly. You are getting those stories told to the people who need to hear them, and you're also collecting the information together. And those are both so important. When did you start this process, Penny? Where is this in the time frame of things?
Well, we first met virtually, because we still haven't met in reality.
Right.
So we met in July last year, and I suppose it took us about 6 months of just kind of talking and thinking through ideas and so on before we actually did the first concrete thing, which was the production of the website that we talked about, which collates all the information, and which it doesn't really say anything different to many of the other websites that are out there, like the PPDA and all the other kind of MDs in America that are working on this stuff. That the information isn't different, but it is. Our concept, as Dan said before, is that it's specifically targeted towards the medical profession rather than towards individuals who are trying to recover. Individuals will still benefit from it. It's not written in difficult medical language or anything because we wrote it.
Right.
But the idea is that we can point doctors towards it and other people working in the medical profession.
Let me also just note that the fact that you guys aren't medical doctors and you're not psychologists, I want to point this out, that every single one of the people who recover, it doesn't matter what they do, they can find something that they can do to help in this. And we need your help. We need all of your help. The two of you are a shining example of this, and it's really exciting. And I think the more we get organized as a field in general, the better. You guys should be on my website. I know I'm on your website. We just got our website up and running, so I will add you guys to that. I want there to be a resource list because we never know where people are going to interface first.
Yeah.
And it's just great if they have this. But I want to hear some now about what it's like trying to work with these doctors who have these 10-minute windows to work with patients and aren't generally thinking about it this way. What have you guys run into? I guess let's start with what the obstacles have been. Dan, maybe you can speak to it first. The obstacles that you've run into in working with doctors.
Yeah, so I think one thing that stood out for me is that they're just as varied as any other people in any other profession. There are some that get it, that are really inquisitive and open and ask questions. and there are others that want to shut the door because they've been programmed in a certain way for many years, and not interested in expanding their horizons, or sort of put it in the woo woo camp. So just like it's too far out there. So I think that's been the first thing for me is that stood out is that they're not uniform. They're just people like anybody else, and some doors will easily open, and some you might have to come back to in a few years.
Right.
But so it's the same. It's the same concept in that the key thing is the belief. Once you've switched the belief to understand that your thoughts and emotions and stress are the cause of your being unwell. It's the same thing, but the doctors have to switch and a lot of them sort of get it. They get frustrated with the fact that they're seeing so many people who aren't recovering, who aren't getting well. Penny's good with the stats; she'll tell you the stat in a minute, I'm sure. But there's quite a large percentage of them have got medically unexplained symptoms that they're getting very frustrated with. But it's getting that if once the doctor can make that switch to it's the stress and emotions that's causing the pain and the illness, and just knowing where to send them to is would be a massive but yet simple change, I think.
Yeah.
And what's that? 40? How many percent of patients?
45. According to the NHS, so the National Health Service website in the UK, 45% of all visits to general practitioners, GPs, are for medically unexplained symptoms, which I'm sure you know is a kind of medical term for the things that they can't work out, which we all know are probably mind-body.
Right. When you have medically unexplained symptoms, that is mind-body, almost uniformly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is another important thing to point out. You guys are showing that if 45% of doctors have these kind of cases on their caseloads and they don't know what to do with them, it shows that we're really not working against doctors. We're working with them. This is something that is a collaborative effort where they need our help. And so I think sometimes people who are recovering or have had these experiences, these often very bad experiences with doctors, can come to see the doctors as the enemy, and I get that. But I think that there's so many doctors who understand generally that stress can cause illness, and maybe they don't understand it can cause pain quite as much, but they're getting there. But they don't know the specifics, and they don't have the resources. Go ahead, Dan.
I think the bit they struggle with is I've heard a lot of mainstream, even semi-celebrity doctors talking about stress. I think the bit that they just need to tip over to is like the repressed emotional bit. Once I think they're getting close to a bigger change from all this good work that the likes of yourself are doing. I think we are getting closer, but that seems to be the belief about repressed emotions. I think there's more research needs to be done yet. Perhaps a lot of them need the facts, the research, whereas I'll just go with what works.
No, it's important that you said it, because a lot of times I'll have patients ask me, well, how am I supposed to get better if stress causes illness and I'm always going to have stress? And it usually isn't the stress that's causing it. It's the stress about the stress that's causing it, and that's usually repressed emotion in some way. You guys probably know this, having watched some of me as well, but I also find that that's my emotions column that we're talking about. But there's the whole doubt column and the power column, and the doubt column is huge in relation to what you guys are doing, because people have both too much information and not enough information at the same time. It's also not centrally organized. So,
and the wrong information.
Yes. So they're swimming in questions and confusion and doubts and fears. And I think it's great what you guys are doing. So let me ask this: what have you noticed anything with doctors that the people who do hear it quickly, what are the characteristics that they usually bring to the table? What makes it happen that they can get it? And is it anything that the way it's presented, or what factors can we point to doctors that really are winning them over more quickly? Penny, why don't you take that one?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. We had a call just this afternoon with two people, one of whom was a doctor, the other of whom was a philosopher, although I don't think we knew that before we spoke to him. But the lady, the doctor, she's a GP here in Scotland where I'm based, and she is clearly an open-minded kind of doctor, and she didn't know, she hadn't heard of Dr. Sarno, she didn't know the specifics of how we recovered, but she was clearly open to what people see as the more alternative approach to medicine or to health. And she's part of a group called the British Society for Lifestyle Medicine, which is becoming a kind of recognised thing, which is actually why we contacted them, because we suspected that they'd be the kind of people who are going to be more open-minded to this, you know. So yeah, I mean, as Dan said, it's you know, it just depends on the individual. You know, doctors are a huge range of different types of people, and there are some who are very closed-minded, we're finding, and just not open to it. Although, you know, we continue to hope that, having talked about it with anyone, we've planted the seed. Like you said at the beginning, you know, that hopefully that seed might start to germinate somewhere at the back there.
Right. Well, we plant the seed in even in people who might be really resistant to it. It can work out over time. But I also think it's great to put in a plug for, let's work with the ones who are ready. And there are plenty who are. You know, I'm seeing a huge change in the time frame that I discovered Sarno to now. It's been massive. And sometimes I've wondered, well, is this just because I live in this world and I'm paying attention to it? What was there before? But when I talk to people about what it was like earlier, and even when I think about my own experience 5 years ago, it's pretty radically different. And I wonder if you guys can speak to how you see it changing, where you see this going in the future. It feels to me like we're getting closer and closer to that tipping point.
I think we're closer, but we're miles off. We are closer, and I think you're right with the first point. Because we're submersed in it, you think that everyone knows it, but the amount of time that it's a surprise to people that stress might be causing pain, it's such a, just to get people to consider that is still a massive challenge. I think it's funny as well, because they quite happily believe you about stress causing heart attack or stress causing strokes, or but physical pain for some reason. I don't know about chronic fatigue, Penny, but it seems to be a real barrier still. So I think there's still a massive way to go, although it's going in the right direction. But you'd be surprised how many people just won't consider.
Oh, don't worry. I'm not surprised by anything with this. I mean, it really is true. When I tell people what I do, generally people are fascinated, but at least 99% of all people I talk to don't know about this. At least.
Here's a question for you, Dan. Penny and I were discussing this. Why is it? It seems that a lot of people understand it conceptually and can see that, yes, stress and emotions will cause pain and illness. But then when it comes to applying it to themselves, but mine's real. Do you know what I mean? My pain's different. It's funny. It's like conceptually, everyone gets it, don't they? But making that shift to applying it to themselves seems to be a
yeah. I think when people, well, I mean, you're asking the right person, because that's a question for a psychologist. Why does that happen? And the thing that I've come to understand about it is that the mind-body process is a psychological defense at base. That is what it is. And in the unconscious world, there's a saying in the unconscious world that the unconscious knows all. And what that means is they know when you're talking to them, they know you're right, but it's unconscious. And they have a defense against knowing you're right for various reasons. It could be that there's all kinds of things that could stand in the way. I'll give you a couple of examples. You know, it's like some people think, well, I don't want to admit that to myself because then I have to think that I did it to myself. Not true. Not at all true. But that's the kind of thing that people can think. Or people could be feeling things like, if I recognize this, then I can go be powerful. And that's actually scary. and then I'll have nothing standing in the way of going and pursuing my dreams. That freaks me out. That's power column work right there, as I see it. So we all have motivation to hide things from ourselves. That's what a psychological defense is.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that goodists, hold on, Penny, let me just finish this and then I'll get to you.
Yeah.
Don't forget your thought, though. The goodists use this particular defense because they don't tend to use the other defenses. The other defenses are too nasty for them. They're trying to do good. This is the last line of defense. That was the last thing I want to say. Go ahead, Penny.
No, I was just going to say that in the case of doctors specifically, or people that work in the medical profession, that their defense, that the reason the ones who are deniers, that they could potentially be seeing it as a threat, because it threatens potentially their career if it really takes off, because there's an awful lot of doctors we're just not going to need anymore. But also threatens them in the sense, I suppose it's a power thing for them. Not that I fully understand your power and doubt columns, but that they, at the moment, they have a lot of power as a doctor. They're seen, they're held as a sort of, key person in our society. And when this information gets out and becomes widespread, people will start to realize that doctors don't actually need to hold all that power anymore.
Great point, Penny. And I think I wanna give a shout out to doctors who are willing to relinquish that, who are more committed to helping people than to holding that unnecessary power. The interesting thing is that they could also view it as, if they just view it this way, they actually have more power because they now have the right information and they really can help people. So it would be a good way of reframing it, which of course I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys know this. But it's a fantastic point that doctors would potentially naturally have some trouble giving this up. I don't. You guys probably know who David Hanscom is, but he. It's remarkable when somebody like David Hanscom or Dave Clark actually take a look at themselves and think, what is happening in this field and what am I doing and what's actually useful. And David Hanscom especially is an interesting case because he did surgeries on lots of people that now he would never do.
Yeah. And
to his credit, he looks himself square in the face and says, I understand this now. He's an advocate for it, so he's more than making up for whatever happened before. And Dave Clark too, these are just two examples. There's others, but he took a look and thought, this really is adding up. Dave Clark isn't even somebody who suffered from mind-body issues himself, but he did take the path of taking his job seriously to the point where no amount of power or misinformation or personal motivation could have stopped him from being the best doctor he could be. And the work you guys are doing is so important. And I wondered, is there anything else you'd want to share with my audience that you'd want them to know about the work you're doing and the direction you have in that? Dan, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so there are a couple of other projects that we're working on. We are working on, we're working with a film producer, an independent film producer, to do some short, emotive recovery stories. Not mine and Penny's, but again, I think just to remind your viewers the power of storytelling, and to go and tell their stories to their doctors and to whichever clinicians they've worked with. So I think that's the overriding message. And the other thing is we're going to try and get some UK-based research going as well. We've got that as a separate project. But yeah, no, for me it's just keep going back and telling the story. Write a letter, send some information. I wrote to my physiotherapist and he got it. We had a good conversation, and he's been looking at it seriously. I'll let Penny tell hers, but Penny got in touch with her doctor too.
That's great. And how about you, Penny?
Yeah, just echoing what Dan said, or at least I think I'm echoing what Dan said. My internet froze for a second, so I actually didn't hear part of it, but I'm sure he was right. Yeah, I also wrote to my doctor. I actually gave her a copy of The Divided Mind for herself, and she phoned me to thank me for it, but I didn't answer the call. I didn't realize it was her. I just thought it was, some unknown number. And she left a really nice message saying, I'm really interested in this stuff. So I'm going to get back in touch with her because since then we've launched the website. So she doesn't know about the website yet. So I'm going to send that to her. And yeah, I think it's just trying to spread the message as much as possible. And as we've said, particularly amongst medical practitioners.
That's great, guys, and I wholeheartedly agree that the storytelling is a particularly important aspect, and it's one of the reasons why one of the 5 segments I put out on my podcast every week is a storytelling of some kind, whether it's me doing a session with somebody, people seeing that story, or people telling their story of recovery. So I want to thank you guys for coming on. Let's keep up this conversation. I'm so excited to be connected to you guys and working together on how we can further this field and get us further down the road so the tipping point happens sooner than Dan thinks. I have optimism about it. But I agree. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm so glad you guys are doing it, and I want to thank you for coming on again.
Yeah, likewise. Keep up the work. Yeah, keep up the work.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for having us, Dan.
All right, my pleasure. What a pleasure talking to Penny and Dan. As I noted at the beginning, there's obviously the inside joke we have with our audience of how many Dans there are, but I guess it's just it's a good name. There were many reasons why I thought it was useful to have Penny and Dan on. Of course, they have their own TMS stories, mind-body stories, so it's good to see that, but it's also something I wanted to highlight, that these are 2 people who, they don't have an MD, they're not psychologists, they don't have the degrees for the background of this, but they still decided, you know what, we have to do something about this. And they chose a very important path, and I'm always very grateful to the various people who are doing the parts of this that I either don't want to do or couldn't do, whether it's Howard Schubiner doing the research, or Penny and Dan interfacing with the doctors, or other doctors like David Schechter and Dave Clark and all the people I've mentioned many times who use their medical expertise to spread the word about these things and to help people get better. So as a field, we are working together, and I'm very optimistic about this. I think I see big changes, not so much in people knowing about this yet, but more in their openness to it when they find out about it. And that, to me, is the beginning of the tipping point. So I'm very excited to see where this all goes. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and I'll get back to you personally.